Homage to fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni. Homage to wisdom warrior Manjushri. Homage to all lineage masters. The Dharma, profound and subtle, is rarely encountered. Now we hear, study and follow it, may realize Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta. Next, we will continue with the profound and important spiritual teachings and invaluable guidance from the words of my perfect teacher. Now, we are discussing the suffering of samsara within the common preliminary practices. Among the sufferings of samsara, the first is the suffering of the hell realms. Regarding the suffering of the hell realms, we have already introduced it earlier. We have covered the cold hells, hot hells, neighboring hells, and part of the solitary hells. Today we will continue to discuss the suffering of the solitary hells. We have talked about these kinds of samsaric sufferings. Everyone present should first of all listen attentively and earnestly. You must not treat this as just something to be understood on the surface level of the preliminary practices. If you only understand it on a superficial level, it may seem as if your own practice is already sufficient. This kind of thinking is unreasonable. We often read the biographies and histories of eminent masters and great practitioners of the past. From these we come to know that these great masters truly practiced in their spiritual journey. They cultivated step by step, following the proper sequence, and with each session of practice, their profound joy in truly virtuous and commendable deeds was indeed remarkably admirable and profoundly inspiring to all who witnessed it. The exemplary actions of the revered Guru Rinpoche throughout his entire life also set a powerful and enduring example for us to follow and learn from. This is because, among all the numerous and significant major events in the Guru's extraordinary life, he regarded teaching and listening to the Dharma as the most important matter to focus on. This is something that every disciple in our lineage should always keep in mind. You could say it should be engraved in our hearts, something we must reflect on again and again. Although our Guru, due to the merit of sentient beings, he temporarily manifested parinirvana before the beings of this world he was guiding. However, his great achievements and some of his biographies still remain in this world. We can emulate him and we can continue to learn from him. As for myself, I have also received the elements of scriptures of this lineage for many years. I have always felt that studying and practicing the Dharma should be the most important thing in one's life. Therefore, for all the Dharma friends present in the Academy, of course, in all aspects, their enthusiasm for listening to the Dharma is very good. As for Dharma friends in the cities, I have learned through various channels that for most people, things are actually quite good, because life in the city does indeed come with a lot of pressure. There are countless distractions in all aspects, and one has to face many, many problems. As a result, it is indeed not easy to make time to listen to the Dharma amidst all this. It's not such an easy thing to do. And for some people, it's actually not due to such objective reasons. But usually, using one's own personal matters to affect others' Dharma study is a very serious fault. So here I would like to once again express my sincere hope and indeed my earnest desire to include some group leaders, counselors, and those in charge who often, because of their own affairs, for example, saying, I have to attend a certain meeting today, so I'm not available. And as a result, the study of a dozen or even 20 people in the group is abandoned, postponed for a day, or pushed back. Or, if I have to go on a business trip, I tell everyone to self-study for a month or half a month. This phenomenon is more common among some people in charge in the cities. On one hand, these people may indeed have their own special reasons. We can't generalize about everyone. It's not right to judge everything simply by saying, not allowed. But on the other hand, you also need to consider that if a single day's class is affected, the fault is actually quite serious. It cuts off the wisdom life. For example, if I don't teach today, I repeatedly reflect on whether going out is for personal reasons. If I go to release captive animals to benefit sentient beings on a larger scale, then I decide not to hold class today. There will be no class today. Other than that, if it's just for some trivial personal matter, or if I'm not feeling well today, but it's not that serious, when it comes to the issue of teaching, I've never postponed or pushed it aside for minor reasons. I always think it over carefully. If I really have to go today, or because my health really can't take it anymore, and if I don't go out to see a doctor, I might actually collapse. So I only truly make such a very personal decision after carefully evaluating my own circumstances, or only if there is some other truly exceptional reason. But now there are some individuals studying in certain Bodhi societies outside who seem to think attending class is optional. Whether they go or not doesn't matter, and everything is decided solely by whatever the group leader feels like doing. Take something in the secular world, for example, going to work today. If your boss doesn't dock your pay or criticize you, you might just get by day to day, and that's acceptable. However, the profound impact of diligently studying the Dharma is truly not at all like that. There is also a particularly significant aspect of karma that is deeply involved. That's why, no matter how big the issue is at our institute, generally speaking, the Dharma teachers have never missed a class. Only if they are truly ill and have absolutely no other option. Nowadays, in very rare cases, a Dharma teacher might suspend classes for a day or two. Apart from that, I believe this is due to the blessings and lineage of our Guru Rinpoche. So I hope that our tutors and students here in the future should also maintain this excellent tradition. This includes people in big cities outside as well. Although they may not be able to be exactly the same as us in the Serene Institute to study with complete perseverance, this might be somewhat difficult for everyone. But some groups are still able to do it. They go through an entire semester without missing a single class. Many Dharma friends are like this, but some groups, because of their own views, and due to a lack of faith in karma and insufficient concentration in various aspects, end up studying in a scattered and incomplete way, so to speak. They study for 2 or 3 days, then skip 2 or 3 days, just following their own inclinations. This kind of person is rather at risk. So today I want to especially emphasize this point here. Although my teaching of the preliminary practices may be quite ordinary, the content I am sharing is indeed something that everyone must know. These are truly essential things you absolutely have to understand completely. Therefore, no matter how great your wisdom, your practice, or your realization may be, this time, as we study systematically, we must ensure the complete transmission. No matter how busy you are or whatever your situation may be, many Dharma friends in our institute are like this. Many Dharma friends are engaged in various aspects, practice, study, and also making aspirations here, including reciting mantras and so on. There are so many things to do. Today a Dharma friend told me, preliminary practices are important, study and contemplation are important, and making aspirations is also important. They want to do everything, but sometimes there just isn't enough time for it all. I think that if many people have this kind of motivation, there is hope. On the other hand, if someone has no interest in practicing the preliminaries, no interest in study and contemplation, and feels everything is just a burden, but instead has a certain interest, joy, and enthusiasm for worldly matters, then it can be said that this person is already heading toward a negative path, which is especially frightening. Therefore, every Dharma friend can take their own direction into their own hands. Whether you rise or fall depends on yourself. That's why we, as the fourfold assembly of Dharma friends, need to repeatedly examine ourselves. This time, we are studying the words of my perfect teacher. For me personally, this is the most extensive teaching I have ever given. I won't teach it in such great detail again in the future. All Dharma friends who are present here today should contemplate each and every level of content thoroughly, carefully, and in great detail. Such careful contemplation will be truly beneficial and will certainly not cause any harm whatsoever. Next, let us now continue our in-depth study of the profound section on the solitary hell, as presented in the revered and comprehensive text known as the words of my perfect teacher. Accomplished Tangtong Gyalpo. While practicing the yoga of channels and winds on a large rock, as a direct result, the rock split cleanly into two, and inside, surprisingly, was a large frog. Its entire body from head to tail was completely covered with an innumerable multitude of minuscule, microscopic living beings, each one relentlessly and voraciously gnawing, chewing, and devouring its flesh with an insatiable hunger, creating a horrifying spectacle of slow, agonizing consumption that was truly disturbing to witness. The frog had its mouth wide open, dark and hollow, suffering immensely and looking extremely pitiful. This is also an example of a solitary hell. Venerable Tangtong Gyalpo, in the Nyingma tradition of Tibet, he was an extraordinary, great, accomplished master. Some historical accounts say that he relied on more than 100 spiritual teachers. He studied both the exoteric and the esoteric teachings, and he attained all the remarkable signs of accomplishment. He also revealed many significant Dharma teachings. Throughout Tibet, he manifested various supreme qualities of a holy being. This notably includes building many iron bridges across Tibet. Even the present-day Luding Bridge was constructed through his miraculous powers. In total, there are 58 bridges. In many important and significant places, he built stupas to effectively subdue negative forces. He manifested parinirvana at the age of 125. However, his emanations still frequently appear in various places to this day. He was truly such an extraordinary and remarkable master. When he practiced the yogas of channels and winds inside a massive boulder, because of his profound and dedicated meditative accomplishment, the truly enormous rock suddenly split wide open. After it dramatically split open, there was, quite astonishingly, a frog residing inside, which was actually a being from the deepest reaches of the solitary hell. The assembled disciples, utterly bewildered, then asked their revered master Tangtong Gyalpo, "What exactly is going on here, master?" The master told them, "In its previous life, this being was a master who performed blood and flesh offerings, a master who conducted blood and flesh rituals making such offerings. From a historical and traditional perspective, in ancient Tibet under the influence of Bon, there was an unfortunate tradition of blood and flesh offerings. It is said that when Guru Padmasambhava came to Tibet, King Trisong Detsen also mentioned that even now, in a few remote places in Tibet, there are still blood and flesh offerings made to deities and masters. What exactly is the reason behind this phenomenon? Guru Padmasambhava, in a tone of great dissatisfaction, said, "Such elements of scriptures are bound to cause countless sentient beings to fall into the Vajra hell, never able to attain liberation." He spoke at length about the many faults of such practices. On this topic, I have previously translated the text, "The Faults of Smoking, Drinking and Killing," which contains a dialogue between Guru Rinpoche and King Trisong Detsen about the dangers of making blood and flesh offerings. If one makes blood and flesh offerings in this life, in the next life one may become a hungry ghost, a fierce spirit, or a malevolent deity, and so on. There are indeed many historical accounts regarding this matter. Since the time of Patrul Rinpoche and other great masters of the past, in many Tibetan regions, the practice of offering blood and flesh has been discontinued. However, in some areas closer to the interior regions, this practice still exists in certain places. I once visited a monastery, and in the nearby villages, every year during the New Year, there were people who killed pigs as offerings to deities. There were also cases where, after someone passed away, pigs and sheep would be slaughtered. Everyone would gather together, saying this was a dedication for the deceased. I have noticed that in Han regions as well, now humanity has already stepped into the 21st century, yet in some remote areas there are still particularly harmful traditional superstitions. I've heard that in many places in Han regions, people still do things like, for example, after someone dies, they feel they must slaughter a pig. There's even a saying that the fatter the pig, the more beneficial it is for the deceased. In fact, this is a completely unreasonable and ignorant superstition. I remember that in the Ksitigarbha Sutra, it is also mentioned that if one commits acts of killing and other negative deeds for the deceased, not only does it bring absolutely no benefit, but it actually causes significant harm to them. It even says that in the future, when they are reborn in favorable realms, they still cannot attain true happiness or be reborn freely as they wish. Therefore, after studying the preliminary practices, we must make sure to eliminate these very bad habits in every place from now on. Back in 1995 in Pixi in Chengdu, Guru Rinpoche was ill at the time. There was a place called International Metropolis where he stayed for several months. Once I distinctly recall seeing that after a beloved family member had sadly passed away, when they respectfully took the body away, they also brought along a live rooster, which was quite an unusual sight. I asked about it at the time, and they said that if you slaughter it together with the deceased, it means that the living creature is accompanying the departed soul through difficult and challenging times. There is such a profound belief, a deeply held conviction. This is an extremely ignorant and baseless superstition. So many of the monastics and lay practitioners present here, I believe that many of you are surrounded by very ignorant and superstitious behaviors. When a family member or a friend passes away, even though we may not be able to do many meaningful things for them, we must never, under any circumstances, do anything that could actually harm them in any way whatsoever. Doing so is especially and profoundly unreasonable and entirely inappropriate. I distinctly remember that in the distant past, within the revered Dhammapada Sutra of Parables, there is a truly fascinating and illustrative story about a powerful and influential king. And it is also a significant case where the act of making offerings of blood and flesh to various spirits ultimately led to truly grave and serious mistakes. There was once a powerful king who was known by the name of Hemochu. He grew up in a remote place where there was no true Buddhism. Their non-Buddhist teachings were rampant and flourishing, so he began to follow them. Later, there was a period when his beloved mother fell gravely ill. He diligently sought out many skilled doctors and experienced physicians, consulting with numerous medical professionals, but despite all his efforts, none could find a cure for her condition. It was truly to no avail, and her health continued to decline. The most renowned local non-Buddhist Brahmin, he invited 200 esteemed Brahmin scholars to see if they possessed any viable solutions. And what advice did the Brahmin give him? Within a relatively short period of time, you are absolutely required to gather together 100 distinctly different kinds of animals, as well as a single innocent child. Take these 101 living beings to a remote, secluded place. Then you must proceed to slaughter each and every one of them and offer their precious blood and their tender flesh as a solemn sacrifice to the powerful gods. Your mother will improve and her illness will be cured. Within a short time, the king managed to gather, for example, elephants, cattle, sheep, all kinds of different beings, assembling them all together. When the appointed time finally arrived, they were carefully taken outside, making their departure through the east gate. At that moment, all the beings cried out in pain and sorrow. After witnessing such an unbearably tragic scene, people were deeply saddened. At that moment, it could be said that heaven and earth trembled. At that time, the Buddha was also in the world. When the Buddha became aware of this situation, he saw that the time was ripe to liberate them. So the Buddha came to this country. On the way, he encountered the king and asked him, "What are you planning to do?" The king replied, "According to the Brahmin's ancient and sacred prophecy, I am diligently preparing to slaughter all these innocent beings." Then the compassionate Buddha, with great wisdom, told him, saying, "If you really slaughter them, it may not necessarily be beneficial for your mother." The Buddha told him that if people want to obtain grain, they need to sow seeds first. To truly gain significant wealth, one must consistently practice generosity. To genuinely attain profound longevity, one must diligently cultivate deep compassion. To acquire wisdom, one must study diligently. If, however, this is not actually the case, then these are all indeed relationships of cause and effect, and their interconnectedness is quite profound. If you act contrary to this, it is impossible to obtain true benefit.
The Buddha finally recited a verse. If a person lives 100 years, diligently serving all the gods of the world, and offers elephants and horses as sacrifices, it is not as good as performing a single act of kindness. This means that if, during a lifespan of 100 years, one diligently engages in all sorts of acts that harm living beings, and offers sacrifices of elephants, horses, and various animals to all the gods of the world, it is completely meaningless. It is better to perform a single compassionate good deed. It is better to do one act of kindness, a single compassionate good deed. Then this treasury of precious qualities will allow the sick person to live a long life as well. Or, if you have any wishes of your own, they can also be fulfilled. After saying this, the Buddha's body radiated a great light. At that moment, the king truly developed immense faith. Because of his faith and joy, he ultimately attained the fruit of a noble one. Through the profound power of this dependent origination, his beloved mother fully recovered from her severe illness. At the same time, the 200 esteemed Brahmin who had just given him valuable advice also reverently followed the Buddha and became devoted monks. Later, the benevolent king also governed the entire prosperous country with great joy and in accordance with the sacred Dharma. This is a truly very good example found within the ancient Buddhist scriptures. Nowadays, some people in the world kill sentient beings in order to gain longevity. For example, some people often say that for the paramount sake of your beloved child's overall health and well-being, it is absolutely essential to consider various important factors and make informed decisions. You should kill chickens or sheep, stew bones, and cook meat to nourish them. Or some patients kill certain sentient beings for the sake of their own health. In fact, by doing so, you are naturally creating another kind of dependent origination for them. They definitely won't be free from illness or be healthy. Therefore, some Dharma friends who are present here, including certain individuals who genuinely believe and earnestly desire to live a very long life, perhaps even aspiring to live to a full 100 years old, must understand that it is absolutely and unequivocally impossible to achieve this profound aspiration of longevity and a long, healthy existence by engaging in the act of killing sentient beings. This practice directly contradicts the very principles that would lead to such a desired outcome, making the attainment of a century of life utterly unattainable through such actions. A few days ago, I mentioned that the world's longest living person lived to be 256 years old. In fact, he was a vegetarian. Indeed, among Buddhists, why are there so many people of advanced age? It is because they propagate the Dharma and benefit sentient beings smoothly. Why is that? There should be two kinds of dependent origination. One kind of dependent origination is having a compassionate heart and not harming any sentient beings. For the sake of their own body and their own benefit, they never kill any sentient being. They don't even harm a single hair of any sentient being. Some great bodhisattvas are like this. This is one kind of dependent origination. There is also another kind of dependent origination, which is the food we consume should be very pure and should not contain all sorts of particularly harmful diseases from sentient beings' bodies. For various reasons, why are there so many long-lived people in the Buddhist community? I personally speculate that this should also be one of the reasons. Therefore, regarding the merits of vegetarianism and the faults of eating meat in the Lankavatara Sutra, the Lankavatara Sutra was actually named after the Buddha went to the country of Lanka to teach the Dharma, and in it, the faults of eating meat are extensively explained. So, for us who are learning later, if we truly read and study these texts, even if not for the benefit of all sentient beings, we would persist in being vegetarian for our own benefit. In my previous work, The Tibetan Esoteric View on Vegetarianism, I also quoted many teachings from eminent masters and great practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. At the same time, I also referenced the Nirvana Sutra, the Lankavatara Sutra. There are also other teachings from the Buddhist sutras and treatises. I remember there's a very moving scene of Milarepa protecting and saving sentient beings that is quite touching and inspiring. At that time, he saw someone slaughtering a sheep. Its intestines were exposed and it escaped, seeking protection from Milarepa. Milarepa blessed it and recited prayers for it. Although it eventually died, through this event, Venerable Rinpoche also became extremely repulsed by the killing of sentient beings and the consumption of their flesh and blood. Indeed, some truly great masters and eminent monks can experience their entire lives profoundly changed by a single, significant event. But we ordinary people in the world, when it comes to scenes or words related to greed, anger, and ignorance, everyone seems to be full of interest and everything leaves a deep impression. If someone sings a pop song, you can immediately sing along. If someone tells a story or shows a movie about worldly emotions, you can remember it clearly right away. But when it comes to Buddhist teachings, things that are truly beneficial and helpful to ourselves, even for countless lifetimes to come, after hearing these stories, we forget them completely. So in this degenerate age, many sentient beings indeed have many shortcomings. Except for a few individuals, it is quite difficult to cultivate good roots and positive habits. But no matter what, we are all people who yearn for liberation and aspire to walk the path to nirvana. We shouldn't just go with the flow because our habits and afflictions are heavy. Each of us must protect and take care of ourselves. We should do our best to practice virtuous actions. We also can't guarantee that we will be like the sages of the past, completely free from committing any negative deeds, even though we can't achieve that. Each of us should do our best every day, devoting part of our time to spiritual practice so that gradually our minds become capable. Then there shouldn't be any external obstacles. So here, when talking about offering flesh and blood, everyone should also regularly observe things from all aspects. After studying the Dharma, observing your body and mind is extremely important. Next, Patrul Rinpoche gives an analysis. Nowadays, lamas who consume flesh and blood can be seen everywhere. When Patrul Rinpoche was alive in Tibet, indeed, in terms of transportation and other aspects, there weren't as many vegetables and daily necessities as there are now. Just as I previously wrote in the Tibetan esoteric view on vegetarianism, from a traditional perspective in this regard, there are some aspects in Tibetan Buddhism concerning the consumption of flesh and blood that are not as pure as in Han Buddhism. Because of this reason, nowadays, there is also a lot of slander and criticism. This is to help the great masters of Tibetan Buddhism dispel these doubts. It is also quite difficult to dispel some of their misunderstandings. Therefore, many people here who are diligently studying Tibetan Buddhism should definitely pay very close attention to this significant aspect, as it holds profound importance. Our institute also requires that all Han Chinese lay and monastic disciples in the institute must be long-term vegetarians. This has been a rule for everyone for many years, and it is still very good now. I hope that this kind of tradition will not be limited to just one Buddhist institute. Many eminent monks and great masters throughout Tibet are also gradually accepting it. At the very beginning, many people probably found it quite difficult. Regarding this issue, we also hope that in the Han regions, disciples of various lineage masters will also reflect deeply. If your teacher or some fellow practitioners frequently consume meat and blood, consider whether this is beneficial or harmful to the Dharma as a whole, to your teacher's activities, and to our own practice. Is it beneficial or harmful? In the past, when this first started, many people said that it was permitted and there would be no faults. As long as the teacher permits it, as long as the teacher blesses it, you can eat meat as you wish. But this kind of view has improved somewhat now. Although some teachers still appear to consume meat and blood, they do not do so very publicly, and their disciples do not openly say, "Our teacher has permitted it, so now we can eat meat." Such topics are not particularly prominent anymore, which can be considered a kind of progress. Hopefully in the future we can all become completely vegetarian, just like in Han Buddhism. I'm afraid that right now, many teachers and monks in Tibetan monasteries still face certain difficulties for the time being. However, in recent years, because of the influence of the academy and various places, the teachings of some great masters and teachers have had a significant impact. Now, unlike 10 years ago when some great masters would come to Han regions, many lay practitioners would openly go to Han Buddhism temples and say some particularly unpleasant things. This kind of situation is becoming less and less common now. We should promote and expand those things that are beneficial to sentient beings and to spiritual practice. Here, Patrul Rinpoche also describes that in Tibet, some rather ignorant patrons would offer the flesh and blood of animals to their teachers, and some teachers, due to their ingrained habits, would then partake of this flesh and blood. Such behavior, it must be said, is very wrong. As it is described here, whenever patrons slaughtered plump and fat sheep, they would stuff the flesh and blood into the throat, spleen, or other internal organs, and place it on the tender meat along the spine to offer to these teachers and lamas. Here, lama refers to teachers and monks. According to ancient tradition, especially in the remote Shiku region, it is widely believed that after slaughtering a sheep, they would stuff some flesh and blood into the intestines or throat, and then place it on the meat along the spine to offer to these monks. They would also carefully pull up their flowing robes and deliberately throw them completely over their heads. Then, much like a hungry baby instinctively suckling milk, They would savor and suck out everything inside with great relish. Regardless of whether it was succulent, tender meat, or rich, flavorful intestines, they would consume every single morsel with immense gusto and profound satisfaction, much like a delighted and eager child enthusiastically sucking on a sweet, delicious treat, savoring every last drop and enjoying the experience completely. Then take out a small knife from their robes and leisurely eat the meat on the outside. After finishing all the intestines and such that were placed on the tender meat earlier, they would then slowly and leisurely start eating the meat on the tender cuts bit by bit. When they had finished their hearty meal, their mouths would be greasy and their heads would be steaming with heat. Because they had eaten so much, they looked like completely different people compared to before the meal. Now they had rosy cheeks and walked with their heads held high, full of confidence. Some people's way of eating meat is described very clearly. Even today, people in the cities are like this too. In restaurants, people present themselves in the same way, just with a slight change in appearance. Every single time we look around a bustling restaurant, we can clearly see just how many sentient beings are tragically killed and then subsequently eaten. In this particular regard, things are especially and remarkably similar. Those who recklessly indulge in eating flesh and blood in this life will have to repay their blood debts with their own bodies in future lives. At that time, the unimaginable suffering in the solitary hell awaits them, will be waiting for them. Because if we consume large amounts of other sentient beings' flesh in this life, then in future lives we will indeed be reborn in the solitary hell. Many of us here, both monastics and lay people, if in the future, when all the right and auspicious conditions come together, even abstaining from meat for just 1 full year brings truly tremendous and significant merit. For dedicated lay practitioners, year by year, gradually and slowly, they can progress. If it really is impossible to become a lifelong vegetarian, then try to reduce your meat consumption as much as possible. It's also good for your health. Gradually, your craving for meat will slowly diminish. This is very important. Otherwise, we will indeed have to repay with our own flesh and blood. There have been such teachings in Han Buddhism in the past as well. During the illustrious Tang dynasty, Master Huaixin thoughtfully wrote the profound record of self-reflection in the Buddhist Gate. Disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha should truly reflect on themselves, much like looking into a clear mirror. There should indeed be such a significant book in the Tripitaka, and it also extensively discusses this very topic. In the past, there was once a Chan master whose spiritual practice was not very good. Later, he began to deceive some patrons and continuously enjoyed their offerings of food. This included some delicious meat, probably, and he thoroughly enjoyed it for many, many years. Eventually, he sadly died, and not long after his unfortunate death, in the courtyard of his esteemed patron, a remarkably soft and unusual fungus began to grow. This peculiar fungus possessed an astonishing characteristic. It was indistinguishable from succulent meat. With great regularity, every time they carefully cut a portion of it down for consumption, and after they had thoroughly enjoyed their meal, the fungus would miraculously regenerate and grow back again. This extraordinary and continuous cycle persisted for an exceptionally extended period. Everyone in their family, young and old, was overjoyed. They all enjoyed eating this fungus and kept eating it. Later on, their envious neighbors became incredibly greedy, thinking that the seemingly endless supply appeared inexhaustible to them. Such a wonderful fungus was growing in the courtyard. One night, they also wanted to eat it. So they meticulously prepared to stealthily steal it and cautiously started to carefully cut into the enormous ancient fungus. Suddenly, a deep, resonant voice emanated from within the fungus. It questioned, "Why are you so cruelly cutting into my very flesh? I assure you, I owe you absolutely nothing at all." They became incredibly, profoundly frightened and trembling, hesitantly asked it, "Who exactly are you? Why is this happening?" Then it replied, "I was once a certain Chan master. Because I enjoyed a lot of offerings from the benefactor's family, I was not worthy, yet I accepted many offerings. Now I can only truly repay them with my very own flesh and blood." Then it humbly asked its kind neighbors, "Could you possibly help me to repay some of this immense wealth? This would lessen my suffering and might even sever this karmic connection." After hearing this, they were also very frightened. On one hand, they told the owner of the house about what happened. At the very same time, they generously offered a full 100 measures of rice to the rightful owner. From that day forward, nothing ever grew within that courtyard again. So nowadays, some people in society, when enjoying wealth, you must make sure it is reasonable and justified. If so, it's acceptable. If it is not reasonable, do your best. Even if I end up a bit poorer and don't eat much, that's still fine. Never use deceptive appearances or false pretenses, or use all sorts of improper means to deceive others. Nowadays, it's true that sometimes, I've seen in both Tibetan Buddhism and Han Buddhism, some monastics, they are not actually saints or great accomplished masters at all, but they present themselves with grand titles as if they are truly remarkable saints. Then they deceive and mislead some followers, taking a lot of wealth from them. Of course, in this life, you might end up living very comfortably and happily in every way. But in the next life, just as Patrul Rinpoche said, will the lonely hell be waiting for us? So we really need to reflect on ourselves. We need to examine how we are actually living right now. A reasonable and fair life is something we can also enjoy. Some people are also very afraid. They don't even dare to enjoy the most basic and reasonable aspects of life themselves. I think that's unnecessary as well. But if you go too far, acting with excessive greed and using such behavior to deceive others, including some lay practitioners nowadays, they frequently use all kinds of deceptive banners and misleading claims to deliberately mislead many unsuspecting followers. Some people are very foolish. As soon as someone claims, I am the manifestation of a great accomplished master, I have supernatural powers, I can perform miracles, I know what your past life was, I should know about the illness in your body, I can see if you are possessed by something. As long as I give a blessing, glare at you or make a gesture, it will immediately be scared away, and so on. They use this kind of language to deceive many people, and they themselves make a living through wrong livelihood, which is completely unnecessary. Therefore, as we live in this world, we truly hope to become pure individuals, to be responsible to sentient beings and to ourselves, so that we won't fall into the lower realms in our next life. This is the kind of person we must strive to become. However, many people in big cities don't even believe in hell, so there may be nothing we can do about that. But no matter what, we still need to make an effort. Especially when it comes to the significant act of eating meat, everyone should truly do their best to reflect on this matter and study the relevant teachings concerning this topic. There are also a few cases here. During his significant and impactful time in Dej, the truly great Khenpo Juda Hufa once thoughtfully told his devoted disciples, "Today, whatever appears in the Oda River, do not under any circumstances let it go." He had his loyal and devoted disciples wait patiently by the tranquil riverbank for the entire duration of the time he was away. Many monks went to keep watch by the river, waiting until the afternoon. It was at that precise moment, as their eyes scanned the flowing water, that they noticed a substantial piece of wood clearly visible as it drifted gently with the current. Therefore, they carefully retrieved it from the water and promptly reported their discovery to their esteemed master, stating, "Except for this section of tree trunk, nothing else was discovered. The virtuous Dharma protector Guru instructed his disciples to quickly split open this piece of round wood to see what might be inside." Everyone was amazed to see that inside the split log there was an unusually large frog. Its body was covered with countless living beings feeding on it. The master performed a bathing liturgies for it, recited scriptures, conducted a liberation ceremony, and said, "This frog is the reincarnation of the monk Oji, who was the treasurer at Dij Monastery. In the past, it is highly probable that he was in charge of the monastery's finance department, a crucial and often complex area of administration. The finance department, even within such a sacred institution, is still a rather intricate and demanding aspect to manage effectively. Consequently, in contemporary times within many monasteries, when the important task of managing their valuable property and assets arises, they meticulously adhere to the principles and guidelines explicitly stated and outlined in the revered Vinaya Sutra. The offerings made to the Sangha and those made to the Dharma hall, as well as offerings to Buddha statues and scriptures, should all be kept separate. I've seen that in some monasteries now. After many devotees make offerings, a single monk makes decisions at will, and this is a particularly alarming situation. I hope that here as well, since there will definitely be many in the future, great masters, abbots, guest monks, each person in charge of a monastery. At such critical and important times, it is absolutely essential to diligently and carefully utilize these precious resources exclusively for the profound and sacred three jewels. They must, under no circumstances whatsoever, be used for personal friends, close relatives, or any other private individual relationships or connections. This is extremely important. At the same time, if these resources are to be used for other purposes, it must be discussed among the monastic community. The Vinaya repeatedly states that the property of the Sangha should be decided by the Sangha collectively. Although an individual may have authority, you cannot act on your own accord. Otherwise, you will face karmic consequences. Therefore, in the past, Guru Rinpoche always emphasized this in our institute as well. So now, whenever the finance department uses any funds, it must be discussed collectively by the Sangha. Otherwise, the karmic consequences are indeed very severe. I've noticed that in some monasteries nowadays, including a few in Han Buddhism and a very small number in Tibetan Buddhism, some so-called masters or abbots who have never studied the Vinaya treat the monastery's money as if it were their own. They decide to buy a car today, and give money to some official, or donate to disaster relief and so on. With just a word, they start spending millions or even tens of millions. From the perspective of karma, this is truly not appropriate. If it were your personal property, you could say whatever you want. But when it comes to collective assets, you really need to be careful. That's why in the Sutra of 100 Karmas and the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish, there are quite a few stories about monastics in relation to monasteries. The reason for this is just as I've described. So nowadays, those officials who abuse their power and bully the weak, they should keep in mind the existence of these hells and be extremely cautious in their words and actions. Dharma teachers with authority, officials, and all those in positions of power, whenever you do anything, you must be especially careful. You can't just think, I have power, no one will say anything, and do whatever you please. This truly doesn't work in terms of karma. Especially in this world, there is still a hell that we cannot see with our naked eyes. What people fear most in the human world is prison. But compared to the harsh reality of prison, hell is truly nothing like that at all. Therefore, we must always diligently keep in mind what was previously mentioned above. As I just said, there are indeed some deeply ingrained bad traditions that persist. Now we must do everything we can to change them. I've heard that in the hometowns of some Dharma friends here. Even now, things are just as I described earlier. They still perform meat-based sacrifices, which is especially bad. Looking at some historical records from the Han regions, this phenomenon did indeed exist in the past. It should have been during the Shang dynasty. At that particular time, not only were various other living beings frequently used for ritualistic sacrifices, but even human beings, tragically, were also sacrificed as well. This significant historical event is clearly recorded and documented in the ancient text known as the Zuo Juan. When people were sacrificed, it was mainly men. India also had such traditions. But later on, these traditions gradually disappeared. However, during the historical times of Mencius and Confucius, their primary sacrificial animals were traditionally 6 distinct kinds, specifically cattle, sheep, horses, pigs, dogs, and chickens. These animals held significant cultural and religious importance in their rituals. You have already learned this extremely well, for sure. So in the future, we must truly eradicate and put an end to these bad traditions. In the past, when I taught Les Miserables, I referenced the ancient Zhongben Qijing. It was remarkably co-translated by 2 highly dedicated people during the illustrious Eastern Han period, and it profoundly says inside, with great wisdom and insight, to kill living beings for sacrifices brings no blessings. The heavenly gods do not eat such offerings. Those who kill are committing offenses. If we kill living beings for sacrifices, we absolutely cannot obtain any happiness, blessings, or wealth. Not even a little will be gained. And all the worldly gods who delight in virtuous deeds, none of them will like or accept such offerings. Only the one who kills will incur boundless and immeasurable negative karma. This kind of tradition in the minds of many intellectuals and others, if it is not eradicated, will indeed bring about all kinds of natural disasters, earth, water, fire, and wind upon humanity. At the same time, it also brings many obstacles and harms to oneself. Therefore, fellow practitioners present here, I often think that many of our fellow practitioners here now, some have become monastics and some have already taken lay precepts. But perhaps in this very life, you have committed many negative actions, some due to tradition, and some due to your own ignorance and foolishness. Some are caused by greed, and some even by anger. For example, killing others, not just in major ways, but even between people. You may have killed someone, even just at night when you're sleeping and a mosquito bites you. At that moment, you kill it out of anger. This kind of situation happens. We truly need to sincerely repent for these negative actions before we die. What we call spiritual practice is a kind of nourishment in the mind, a relatively gentle kind of response. This is very important. Our spiritual practice, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, is completely different from literary studies. In literary studies, once you understand something at a certain level, that's enough. But in spiritual practice, every time we read a passage, the content of the text is not meant to just stay on the page. Instead, we should look within ourselves. Have I ever made such mistakes before? Oh, if I have made such mistakes in the past, then I should find a way to repent for them. In the future, will I make these mistakes again on my life path? If I am about to make them, how can I prevent it? How can I stop myself? We should look for solutions in this regard. That is what a true practitioner does. In fact, whether in the Han regions or in Tibet, many great monks, accomplished masters, and realized beings often possess this kind of self-control. But people like us, who are always wandering in samsara, just go with the flow, following our discriminating thoughts and being swayed by external circumstances. We have never truly reflected on ourselves or set standards for ourselves. Even if we sometimes read a good book or receive guidance from a teacher, we might change a little for a day or two, but soon after we return to our original state. We end up just like before, committing all kinds of wrongdoings. This way of living is unreasonable. We can't always have a teacher standing over us with a stick, shouting at us. It's the same when we go to school. Once we graduate from kindergarten, we can't go back to study in kindergarten again. After finishing middle school or elementary school, you can't go back to those either. It's the same when we study at a Buddhist institute or rely on a teacher. There are definitely certain limits. Some people with good fortune may be able to rely on a teacher for 20 or 10 years. Some people rely on a teacher for 5 or 6 years, or even just a few months. This happens too. If you look at the biographies of some great masters and eminent monks from the past, some had the karmic connection to follow their teacher all the way through, but often the teachings received in a short period would benefit them for their entire life. So sometimes I feel that a longer period of reliance on a teacher doesn't necessarily mean you'll achieve realization faster. Some people seem to spend more and more years relying on a teacher. They've already become numb and indifferent, as if thinking, this teacher is just nagging every day. It's nothing special. I'll just go about my own business. They typically start their culinary preparations in the bustling kitchen, right? It's quite possible that some individuals might actually be actively engaged in the process of cooking delicious meals at this very moment. Now they've stopped. They're scared now. Just kidding, but it's possible. Next, let me say this. In the past, when the world-honored one was in the world, there was a butcher living in the city where he stayed. At night, he upheld the vow not to kill, but during the day, he slaughtered without restraint. After he died, he was reborn in the solitary hell. What kind of retribution did he face? At night, he dwelled in a comfortable and delightful palace, feeling at ease and content. There 4 beautiful women attended to him, offering food and drink, and he enjoyed great happiness. But when day came, the beautiful residence turned into a burning iron house. The 4 beautiful women turned into terrifying, mottled, vicious dogs that tore into him. This is also one of the conditions in the solitary hell. This situation has also been explained to everyone in the Pure Land teachings. There was also a person who committed sexual misconduct. During the day, he upheld the precept against sexual misconduct, but at night he engaged in illicit acts. After death, he too fell into the solitary hell. Completely different from the previous case, he indulged in pleasure during the day and suffered extreme torment at night. Because of keeping precepts, some people only observe them during the day or for a short period at night. Indeed, there is great merit and benefit in this. All of these are true events personally witnessed by Venerable Jukshinji. In a serene and elegant monastery, there lived 500 monks. Every day at noon, when the wooden fish was struck to gather the monks for the meal offering, the Dharma hall would instantly transform into a burning iron house. Their arms, bowls, dishes, and all their utensils would turn into weapons. They would start to quarrel and fight with each other. After the meal offering time ended, everything would return to normal and they would go their separate ways. Moreover, they would indulge in pleasure to their heart's content. What was the reason for this? It was because in the time of Kashyapa Buddha, at noon during the meal offering of the 500 bhikshus, they would argue incessantly while eating, constantly debating with each other, and so on. As a result, they experienced this kind of karmic retribution in their present lives. The 8 hot hells mentioned above, along with the 8 cold hells, make a total of 16. In addition, there are the neighboring hells and the solitary hells. Altogether, there are 18, which people commonly refer to as the 18 levels of hell. Therefore, as I just explained to everyone, we should, to thoroughly and meticulously understand the intricate details of these various hells, what their exact numbers are, the precise lifespan experienced within each individual hell, and so forth, as well as the different levels of suffering endured there, and the various reasons and causes that lead beings to be reborn in these hells. We should come to know all of this in detail. In doing so, we will develop boundless compassion for the sentient beings who are born in hell, and we should do everything we can, sparing no effort, to help ourselves and all sentient beings to be liberated from such hells and not fall into them. We must try every possible means. Otherwise, if we only listen to the Dharma superficially and carelessly, and then ignore it without earnestly putting it into practice, it will become the cause for us to turn into arrogant, slick Buddhists who only talk the talk. It will become something criticized by the sages and a source of shame for the wise. In fact, there is much here that truly deserves our deep contemplation. Even just seeing or hearing about depictions of hell, recalling, reciting, or creating such images can give rise to a sense of fear. How much more so if one were to actually experience the ripened results? Bodhisattva Nagarjuna also spoke in this way. When we see some paintings of hell, hear teachings about the sufferings of hell, or read such texts ourselves, we also feel especially afraid, our hair standing on end. So when actually experiencing these sufferings firsthand, how could we possibly endure it? This is something everyone should reflect on. Now we're running out of time. We went into some detail at the beginning, but now there's really no way to completely wrap it up. What should we do about this dilemma? The following is explained like this. We should practice earnestly and not harbor any arrogance. Otherwise, if we don't even understand these basic Buddhist principles, it would be truly laughable. In the past, there was a dignified and arrogant bhikshu who came to pay respects to young Rinpoche. Young Rinpoche asked this bhikshu, "How well do you understand the Dharma?" The bhikshu boasted and replied, "I am thoroughly versed in the Dharma, knowledgeable and well-read in all aspects." He said this very proudly. Then the master asked again. He was quite adept at this sort of thing. He said, "Then what are the 18 levels of hell?" The bhikshu stammered and replied, "There are 8 hot hells and 8 cold hells, making 16 in total." Then he kept thinking and thinking, but couldn't come up with an answer. So he added, "Plus the Karmapa's black hat and red hat, that makes 18. Actually, this bhikshu didn't include them in the number of hells out of disrespect for the Karmapa. He only counted them among the hells number, because at that moment he had forgotten the names of the solitary hell and the neighboring hell. At the time, the Karmapa's red hat and black hat were both very famous. So he quite casually included them in the overall count of the hells. Truly, such incredibly arrogant people invariably behave in precisely this manner. So if you lack some basic Buddhist fundamentals, you'll really make a fool of yourself and do many things wrong. This doesn't just happen exclusively in Buddhism. It also frequently occurs in various worldly matters. I heard that in the past there was a man from the northeast who went to the south, and the southerners invited him to a meal. He had never eaten water caltrop before. Water caltrop grows in lakes, and its shell is very hard on the outside. The host invited him to try it first, and he felt a bit embarrassed. No matter what the circumstances, he deliberately put the entire water caltrop into his mouth and thoroughly chewed it. The host saw what he was doing and noticed something was off, so he said, "You can't chew the shell of the water caltrop like that." He felt a bit embarrassed, but he still didn't want to admit he was wrong. He said, it's because I'm not used to the southern climate and environment. He claimed that the shell of the water caltrop is very good for cooling the body and detoxifying. "That's why I deliberately ate it," he said. Then the host asked, "So do water caltrops also grow in the northeast?" Yes, there are water caltrops everywhere, in front of and behind the mountains, because they grow in the lakes, So among people in the world, there are also those who act like this. If things reach this point, not to mention seeking the Dharma or practicing, even the literal meaning of the words is still unclear to them. This is truly something to be deeply and profoundly ashamed of. Some truly wise and discerning people would absolutely never do this. Sakya Pandita, a revered and insightful scholar, also explicitly said so. Fools wear their knowledge openly on their lips, while the truly wise keep their knowledge deeply in their hearts, reflecting a quiet wisdom and thoughtful consideration. Wheat chaff floats on the water's surface, while precious gems sink to the bottom. Similarly, a wise person does not boast about their knowledge or show off their wisdom in front of others. But as for fools, on the surface they truly seem to know absolutely everything, possessing all knowledge, but in reality they understand absolutely nothing at all. There was also a particular county official in the past, a long time ago, and one of his subordinates, a very diligent individual. Let's pause here for now.
Dharma